Who's been the best performing player at each championship club so far this season? That's going to be the focus of today's video. Now, you guys who are watching your teams week in, week out will know more than me, but from the outside looking in, I'd like to say that I've got a decent perspective of who are the top performing players at every championship club. And in today's video, I'm going to be giving my verdict on each side's top performing player so far this season. 350 likes will be massively appreciated as well, but without any further ado, let's jump in. Starting out with Blackburn Rovers, there was a few options I was considering, but I think I'm going to give it to Lewis Travis. I think it felt like under John Dole Thomason, it almost felt as if he was being pushed aside. Obviously, he spent the second half of last season out on loan with Ipswich Town, but he's come back into the frame at Blackburn this season under John Eustace, and I'd argue he's been their most consistent performer. He started in all 15 of Blackburn's championship matches so far this season. He's made more tackles than any other Blackburn player this far into the campaign with 41. He's also been involved with 3 goals from midfield as well. It feels like he's back to playing the best football of his career, and I think Eustace will take a bit of credit for that. But Travis as well, because it sort of felt like, I mean, last season especially, that his career at Blackburn wasn't going anywhere, but he's totally revived that this season. Bristol City's best performing player this season, I'm going to give it to Jason Knight. I was umming and ahhing between a few different players for Bristol City. I think the makeup of their entire midfield has given them a really strong structure so far this season. So the likes of Max Bird, Joe Williams also been really good, but Knight especially, whenever I have caught a glimpse of Bristol City this season, has always been someone that's quite impressed me. I thought he looked good when Bristol City came to Deepdale not long ago. It's only him and Viner who have started in all 15 of Bristol City's championship matches so far this season. Knight's been involved in 5 goals from midfield as well, with 1 goal and 4 assists so far, and it just feels like he's getting better each week. Burnley's top performing player this season, I'm going to say, is Maxime Esteve. It's hard to look past that Burnley defence considering their brilliant defensive record so far this season. They've only shipped 6 goals in their opening 15 matches, and I'd say he's probably been their most consistent performer in that back line. And especially when the majority of Burnley's attacking players haven't really been in full flow this season, it's quite easy to point out one of their defenders as their best player so far this season. And for him especially, I mean, he's head and shoulders above the majority of other defenders at this level, isn't he? Cardiff's best player so far this season, I'd probably say it has been Ruben Colwill. It feels like he's maturing into a more prominent player within that Cardiff squad right now. So far this season, he's created 21 chances. That's more than any other Cardiff player has managed up until this point. He's been involved in 4 goals as well. I believe only Callum Robinson in that Cardiff squad has been involved in more goals than Colwill has so far this season. Given his age and pedigree as well, it still feels like there's more to come from him as well, which is exciting. Coventry's best performing player up until this point, I would say it has been Haji Wright. The majority of Coventry players have been pretty inconsistent up until this point. It's why they find themselves in the predicament in the league table that they do at this stage. But for Haji Wright, more often than not, he has been the player delivering that quality in the final third. He's been involved in 8 goals so far this season, with 7 goals and 1 assist, currently averaging a goal contribution every 128 minutes in the championship. He's had a number of standout performances of late as well. Really good in those wins against Luton and Middlesbrough. He was good over the weekend where he scored against Sunderland as well. And he's actually one of the few Coventry players who have actually overperformed their XG so far this season, which shows he's been pretty clinical as well, given the chances he's had. Derby's best performing player up until this point, I'd say it's Ebu Adams. It's just turned out to be a really successful signing from a Derby point of view, and I think all the Derby fans were always quite confident that this was going to be a good deal on a permanent basis after how well he'd done for them on loan in League One last season. As of recording, he's made 60 successful tackles in the Championship this season, which is more than any other player. Breaks things up in the middle really well, and I think a very popular player at Derby, and for all the right reasons. It's not been a great season so far for Hull City. Their best performing player, I'd be tempted to say Mohamed Baloumi. He's really someone who's grown on me in recent weeks, and the news that he's going to be out for the foreseeable future is an absolute hammer blow for Hull City, especially with Liam Miller also sidelined for a long duration as well. Baloumi looked like a really lively winger in the glimpses that I have seen of him. His underlying stats have been really impressive for Hull up until this point of the season as well, averaging 2.5 shots per game, 2.3 key passes per game. Standout performance of the season came in that 4-1 thumping against Cardiff where he scored twice, and like I say, the injuries just come at the worst possible time for Hull. For Leeds United, I'm going to give it to Pascal Struijk. Leeds have had a really strong and sturdy defensive record so far this season. I think he's obviously been at the base of that. He started in all 15 of Leeds' matches so far this season, where they've only conceded 9 goals so far. That's the 3rd best defensive record in the league. You can definitely look at a number of other Leeds players as some of their top performers. I mean, someone like a Willie Gnonto is absolutely brilliant when he is on it, but it still feels like he can be a little bit up and down week to week maybe. Junior Firpo is another player who I think has looked good most weeks when I've seen him as well. But Leeds United fans, who would you give the nod to as your best player of the season so far? Luton's top performer up until this point, I'm going to give it to Alfie Doherty. Don't get me wrong, he's not been without his mistakes, as the vast majority of that Luton squad have been guilty of making so far this season. But up until this point, he's created more chances than any other player in the Championship, with 45 chances created for his teammates so far. He's got 4 assists in 13 matches, and from that left-hand side, with the whip that he's got from either a set-piece delivery or from a cross from open play, he's just a menace on that side, isn't he? Middlesbrough's top performing player up until this point, I'm going to give it to Finn Azaz. This may be a bit of recency bias because he was absolutely brilliant in the weekend just gone by in that game against Luton, where he scored twice and got an assist. But the last few weeks especially, I think the 24-year-old has really come into his own in that side. He's got 3 goals and 5 assists so far this season. He ranks 2nd in the Championship for the amount of chances he's created so far for his teammates. 39 chances he's created in 15 matches so far. Got an eye for goal, and it feels like when he's at his best, Middlesbrough are at their best as well. Millwall's top performer this season, I'm tempted to give it to Ryan Leonard, you know. I think he was among Millwall's best players from last season as well. I think he's continued that consistency into this season as well. Someone who doesn't maybe always get the plaudits from people outside of Millwall. I just think he's such a solid player, and often his levels won't drop below, you know, a 7 or a 6 out of 10 every week. He started in all 15 of Millwall's matches so far this season. Although I've got to give a shout out to Romain Esse as well, who's been a bit of a live wire in that Millwall attack, who would also be worthy of a nod for this video as well. Norwich's best performing player, of course, it's Borja Sainz. He's been arguably the best player in the Championship so far this season. He's got 11 goals and 2 assists in his opening 15 matches, and I mean, the guy scored some absolute worldies up until this point. It always feels like Norwich in particular thrive when it comes to developing these creative sort of mavericks in the Championship. You know, thinking back to previous years gone by where they've had the likes of Emi Buendia, James Maddison, even going back to a Wes Hoolahan or someone like that. It feels like Sainz is the next sort of player of that ilk. So far this season, he's currently averaging a goal contribution every 102 minutes, and if he keeps up this consistency, Norwich may struggle to keep hold of him for long. Oxford United's best performing player this season, I'm going to give it to Jamie Cumming. I think he's adapted to the level really well so far this season. Prior to this season, he'd never played in the Championship. He'd had a number of loan spells out into League 2, League 1 from Chelsea. Oxford signed him this summer on a permanent basis, and pound for pound, he's probably been one of the best goalkeepers in the Championship so far this season. In terms of goals prevented, he's been the 3rd best keeper in the Championship this season, having prevented 5.1 goals based on the XG he's faced so far. He's made 48 saves, which is a stat that can only be better by 2 Championship goalkeepers after 15 matches, so I think he's worthy of Oxford United's best player so far this season. In terms of Plymouth Argyle, I mean, it's definitely been Ibrahim Sissoko as the player who's got me out of my seat the most when watching Plymouth up until this point. Obviously, the red card against Cardiff sort of goes against him as a bit of a black mark to his record so far this season, but when he's been on the pitch, he's often been Plymouth's most creative and threatening outlet. He's only played 637 minutes of Championship football so far this season, but has still scored 3 goals and got an assist in that time. He is set to miss the next few months with an injury, I believe, which is an obvious blow for Plymouth, but judging their whole squad so far, for me, from the outside looking in, he's definitely been their live wire. For Portsmouth, I'm going to say their best performing player has been Callum Lang. I don't think Lang was brilliant the last time we saw him in the Championship with Wigan Athletic. He obviously came into that season with quite a bit of a reputation after having a fantastic season in League 1, but things never really materialised for Lang during that season with Wigan in the Championship. I think he only scored 1 goal as they ultimately were relegated, but so far this season he's been Pompey's most potent forward. He's already got 4 goals and an assist, brings a lot of energy to that side as well. well. And even in the matches where he's not been scoring, he'll often be a bit of a nuisance to the opposition. From a Preston North End perspective, I'm going to say our best player this season has been Ali McCann. I think McCann is one of the players who's most benefited from this new style of play that Paul Heckingbottom is trying to instill within this group. I think it really suits him, being a little bit more high tempo, looking to win the ball back a little bit higher up the pitch. It just suits him down to the ground. He's made 40 tackles so far this season, which is way more than any other player in the Preston squad. The next player with the most tackles, for example, is Brad Potts with 25. The biggest criticism that people have probably had about McCann over the last few years at North End is his on-the-ball quality. Off the ball, he's always been brilliant, but I think he's slowly been developing that side of his game as well, and week in, week out, I'd definitely pinpoint him as our most consistent performer so far this season. QPR's best player this season, I'm tempted to give it to Paul Nardi, you know. It's a difficult one because QPR haven't exactly been watertight at the back. They've conceded a lot of goals, 25 in their 15 matches so far this season, but I just look at the majority of outfielders this season. I think there's been so much inconsistency within that squad. And I look at Nardi, I don't really think he's been at fault for many of the goals he's conceded this season. And actually, in a lot of examples, I think he's been the player keeping them in matches. Only 2 goalkeepers in the Championship this season have faced more shots than Nardi, which sort of paints the picture of what he's been up against in the Championship this season. But I think he's proven to be a decent pickup for QPR so far, albeit I struggled a little bit to pick QPR's best player this season because I just think there's been so much inconsistency throughout that entire squad. Sheffield United's best player this season, I'm going to put down as Vinicius Souza. There were a few different players I could have gone towards. Obviously, Gus Hamer's had the sort of compilation-worthy moments so far this season. He's scored some great goals and has been brilliant going forward. But with Souza in particular, a lot of the time you get this from clubs that have just come down from the Premier League, and you see players that just look a level above the competition in the Championship, and Souza right now is one of those players. The guy's made 55 tackles in the Championship so far this season. He's just brilliant at setting them up at the base of that midfield, and I think he's been a key component in terms of why they've been so hard to break down this season. From a Sheffield Wednesday perspective, I'm going to say their best performing player up until this point has been Shea Charles. I think there was quite a bit of expectancy on him at Southampton last season, given the money they purchased him for from Manchester City, and he was sort of in and out of that Saints squad under Russell Martin during their promotion season, but he's nailed down a starting spot at Sheffield Wednesday this season. I think he and Bannon complement each other fairly well in midfield as well with their different sort of skill sets. Thinking back to the Steel City derby over the weekend as well, I thought Charles was probably Wednesday's best performer in that game. Been involved in a couple of goals so far this season as well. I think he'd get my nod as Wednesday's best player. Stoke City's best performing player this season, I mean, look no further than Victor Johansson. The guy's made more saves than any other Championship goalkeeper this far into the campaign. He's prevented more goals than any other goalkeeper as well. 9.3 prevented goals based on the XG he's faced so far this season. Listen, if you've been watching the channel for a while, you'll already know my thoughts on Victor Johansson. From his Rotherham days, I've always been a massive fan. I think he's been one of the best goalkeepers in the Championship for quite a few years now, and I think he's continued that with Stoke City. Now, don't get me wrong, early on at Stoke, first sort of 5 or so matches maybe, there were a few jittery moments where I think maybe a few Stoke fans were a little bit unsure about him, but if we're talking recently, I think he's been absolutely brilliant, and looking at that whole Stoke squad, I think he'd have to have my vote as their best player so far. Stoke fans, would you agree? Let me know down below. Sunderland's best player this season, I'm going to give the nod to Joe Bellingham. I just think he's developed at such a rate where, I mean, the last sort of 18 months of his career have been an absolute whirlwind, haven't they? But I think there's been a lot more consistency to his performances so far this season. I think Sunderland are a much better team with him in the starting 11, as maybe has been showcased recently. Obviously, the latest 2 matches he's been suspended for. Sunderland failed to win either of those games, and he is someone that gets me up and out my seat when I'm tuning into a Sunderland match. Now, don't get me wrong, picking Sunderland's best performing player was a tough one because they've just had so many top players this season that it feels like are all sort of maxing out on their potential at the same time. You know, you've got Dennis Sirkin, who's been brilliant, Mundell, who's been a bundle of tricks to watch, Trey Hume, Luke O'Nien, Chris Rigg, the list goes on and on and on, but for me personally, I think Bellingham's just been the personal favourite of mine so far. Swansea City's top performing player this season, I'm going to give it to Lawrence Vigouroux. He was coming in to fill the gloves of the very popular Carl Rushworth, who had obviously been on loan there last season. season. And considering Vigouroux literally hadn't played for the 12 months prior to him moving to Swansea, he'd literally just been sat on the bench for Burnley. I think it's really impressive that he's instantly adapted to the level. In terms of goals prevented so far this season, he's been the second best goalkeeper in the Championship, only behind Victor Johansson. Swansea boast one of the best defensive records in the league this season, having only conceded 10 goals in their opening 15 matches, and I think that he's played a key part in that. Watford's best player this season, I'm going to give it to Georgi Chakvedadze. He's definitely been their most exciting player for me personally. The best chance creator up until this point of the campaign. He's only got 3 assists, but based on his creative numbers could have way more than that. That's probably the area of his game where I'd like to see him adding a little bit more. He's only scored 1 so far this season. He's got 3 assists as well, but if he can up those sort of numbers to go along with his really consistent performances so far this season, I mean, there's no doubt Watford have got a top player on their hands there. Then finishing things off with West Brom, a couple of contenders. I'm going to give the edge to Josh Maja, I think. 9 goals after 15 matches is a really impressive return, especially when you consider West Brom themselves have only scored 16 goals so far this season, so Maja's literally scored 56% of their league goals up until this point of the campaign. The hat-trick on the opening day against QPR was absolutely fantastic. He had a little bit of a drought, but has picked things up recently with goals against Hull and Luton. Although you've also got the likes of, Hegeman and Moa, who have been really good for the Baggies as well this season. But there you guys have it. That will now wrap it up for today's video. Thank you very much for tuning in. There was the best player from every Championship club so far this season, in my personal opinion. Do you agree with me? Let me know in the comments down below. Other than that though, guys, thank you very much for tuning in. If you did go on to enjoy, make sure to leave a like, and I'll see you all in the next one.